The Last Dance by Janson Davies. Chapter 1. The Treaty. The war had lasted so long that no one alive remembered its beginning. It was etched into the bones of both civilizations, Earth and Tyrelia, like a scar that refused to fade, 1,000 years of bloodshed, betrayal, and silence. And now, in the heart of the alien capital, peace was being signed not with ink, but with breath held and eyes watching. Lieutenant Jason Card stood among the human delegation, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. His dress uniform bore the insignia of Earth's Interstellar Defense Corps, but his eyes betrayed something deeper: weariness, skepticism, and the faintest flicker of hope. The Tyrolean palace was unlike anything he'd seen. It shimmered with crystalline walls that pulsed with ambient light, as if the building itself were alive. Gravity shifted subtly in the corridors, and the air smelled faintly of ozone and crushed violets. Alien guards, tall, silver-plated automatons, lined the hall, their glowing eyes tracking every movement. At the far end of the chamber, seated on a throne carved from starlight and obsidian, was Queen Aelira. She was the last monarch of Tyrelia, a symbol of unity and survival. Her hair was white as frost, cascading down her shoulders like a waterfall of light. Her skin bore the faint shimmer of her people's bioluminescent heritage, and her eyes, violet, ancient, unreadable, held the weight of centuries. Jason had read her dossier. She was rumored to be over 200 years old, preserved by Tyrellian bioengineering and ritual. She appeared to be in her early 20s. She had never married, never taken a consort, never danced. Until today. The treaty ceremony was brief. Words were spoken in both languages, holographic seals exchanged, and the final clause, mutual non-aggression, was etched into the air by a beam of light. Then came the silence. No one cheered, no one clapped. The war was over, but peace was a stranger. Jason glanced at the Queen. She hadn't moved. Her guards flanked her like statues, and the alien dignitaries kept their distance. He felt the weight of history pressing down on him. This wasn't just a diplomatic mission. It was a reckoning. And somewhere deep inside, he knew the real ceremony hadn't begun yet. Chapter 2. The Banquet. The palace transformed. Where moments before it had been a cathedral of silence and ceremony, it now pulsed with light and sound. The banquet hall, an amphitheater of translucent stone and floating platforms, came alive with alien music, strange and hypnotic, played on instruments that shimmered like liquid glass. Jason Card stood at the edge of the gathering, his military instincts scanning the room, even as his senses struggled to absorb it all. The Tyrellians moved with elegance, their gestures fluid, their expressions unreadable. Human dignitaries mingled awkwardly, trying to match the grace of their hosts, but failing in subtle ways, too loud, too stiff, too human. The Queen had not moved. She remained on her elevated dais, surrounded by her robotic sentinels, tall humanoid constructs with mirrored plating and glowing eyes. They stood like statues, but Jason could feel their attention, like heat on the back of his neck. A server passed by, offering a drink that shimmered with bioluminescent swirls. Jason declined. He wasn't here to celebrate. He was here to observe. Then the music changed. It slowed, deepened, became something ancient, a rhythm that felt like memory. The Tyrellians turned toward the center of the hall, where a circular platform had begun to rise. It hovered above the floor, rotating slowly. Couples began to step forward. Human and alien dignitaries alike moved toward the platform, pairing off in a tentative dance. It was a gesture of unity, symbolic and rehearsed. Jason's eyes drifted to the Queen. She stood alone. Her gaze swept the room, but no one approached. Whether out of fear, reverence, or ignorance, she remained untouched by the ritual. Jason hesitated. Then he moved. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the gravity of the moment resisted him. The crowd parted slightly, murmurs rising. The robots shifted, their heads turning in perfect unison. He reached the edge of the dais. The guards raised their weapons. Janson stopped. The queen raised her hand, her voice calm and crystalline. "Let him pass." The robots lowered their arms. Janson stepped forward, heart pounding. He looked into her eyes, violet, endless, and held out his hand. "Can I have this dance?" The music faltered. The crowd froze. The robots reactivated, weapons humming. Janson felt the air tighten around him. Then the queen spoke. "It will be my pleasure," she said, her voice carrying across the hall. "My betrothed." Janson blinked. Betrothed? But her hand was already in his, and the music resumed, slower, deeper, more intimate. They danced, alone. The hall watched in stunned silence as the Queen of Tyralia and a human lieutenant moved together in perfect rhythm, their steps echoing across centuries of war. Janson didn't understand what he'd done. Not yet. But the Queen's eyes never left his, and somewhere deep inside he knew this was no ordinary dance. Chapter 3. The Dance. Janson moved with practiced ease, his military training lending him poise. But Queen Elira's movements were something else, fluid, almost prophetic, as if she were dancing not to music, but to memory. Their eyes met. Janson saw no fear in hers, no surprise, only certainty. Jason's mind raced. What did I just do? The dance continued. One rotation, two. A slow spiral of ritual and revelation. He glanced at the human delegation. His commanding officer looked pale. The ambassador's mouth was slightly open. No one moved. No one spoke. The queen leaned in, her breath brushing his ear. "In our culture," she whispered, "to ask for a dance at a treaty banquet is to ask for union. It is the ancient rite, the binding vow." Janson swallowed hard. "I didn't know." "I know," she said, but the gesture was made and witnessed. The music reached its final crescendo. Janson and Elira stopped in perfect synchrony. The silence returned. Then, slowly, a single clap echoed from the back of the hall. Another joined, then another. Applause built like a wave, hesitant, then thunderous. Janson stepped back, releasing her hand. His heart pounded, his thoughts spiraled. The queen bowed her head slightly, regal and unreadable. Janson turned to leave. But he knew. He hadn't just danced. He had crossed a threshold, and the war, it seemed, had ended with a wedding. Chapter 4. The Fallout. Janson barely remembered leaving the dance floor. The applause had faded into a blur, the queen's hand had slipped from his, and the floating platform had descended like a dream, dissolving into daylight. He walked in silence, flanked by two Tyrolean guards, their mirrored armor reflecting his own stunned expression. He was escorted to a private chamber, opulent, sterile, and unmistakably alien. The walls pulsed faintly with ambient light, responding to his presence. A table had been set, with food he didn't recognize. He didn't touch it. Minutes later, the door slid open. Admiral Dahlgren entered, face grim, eyes sharp. Behind him, Ambassador Chen followed, her expression unreadable. Janson stood. "What the hell were you thinking?" Dahlgren snapped. "I didn't know," Janson said. "I just asked her to dance." Chen stepped forward. "You asked her to marry you." Janson blinked. "That's not what I—" "In Tyrellian culture," she interrupted, "a dance at a treaty banquet is a binding proposal. It's ancient law, witnessed by both delegations, recorded by the palace AI. You're engaged, Lieutenant." Janson sat down slowly. "So what happens now?" Dahlgren crossed his arms. "You go through with it." Janson looked up. "You can't be serious." If you back out, Chen said, the treaty collapses. The Tyrellians will see it as a betrayal, a deliberate insult. We're talking about the death of millions, Jason. Maybe billions. Jason felt the room tilt. I didn't mean to. Intent doesn't matter, Dahlgren said. Symbolism does. You made the gesture. She accepted. Now you're part of the piece. Jason leaned forward, hands clasped. So I marry her. And then what? I live in the palace? I become some kind of consort? Chen nodded. You'll be given quarters, trained in protocol, monitored, of course, but you'll have access, influence, and if the queen bears an heir. Jason stood abruptly. Stop. Silence. He walked to the window. Outside, the alien city shimmered beneath twin moons. He felt like he was staring at a future he hadn't chosen. She didn't force me, he said quietly. She didn't manipulate me. She just accepted. Dahlgren stepped forward. Then accept your role. You're not just a soldier anymore. You're a symbol. Jason turned. Of what? Chen met his gaze. Of peace, of unity, of the last dance. Chapter 5. Palace Intrigue. Jason Card had worn many uniforms in his life, cadet, lieutenant, envoy, but none felt as heavy as the ceremonial robes now draped across his shoulders. They shimmered faintly with embedded circuitry, designed to regulate temperature, posture, and mood. He hated them. The palace staff had greeted him with polite formality, their expressions unreadable. He was assigned quarters in the eastern wing, a suite carved from translucent stone and threaded with living vines that pulsed with bioluminescent light. It was beautiful. It was a cage. He knew he was being watched. Every surface in the room was a sensor. The mirrors tracked his eye movements. The floor responded to his gait. Even the air tasted faintly of surveillance, sweet, sterile, and artificial. Jason paced. He'd been briefed on Tyrellian customs, but the information was fragmented, filtered through diplomatic necessity. He knew enough to avoid direct eye contact with elders, to never touch a ceremonial object without permission, and to never, ever ask for a second dance. But he didn't know what came next. The Queen had not summoned him. No messages had arrived, no instructions, just silence. He tried to leave his quarters once, wandering into the corridor. 2 robot guards appeared instantly, blocking his path with mirrored arms. Restricted, one said. Jason returned to his room. He spent the next hour studying the architecture, how the walls shifted subtly with the time of day, how the ceiling displayed constellations he didn't recognize. He found a small library terminal and requested texts on Tyrellian history. Most were redacted. Then, just before the third moonrise, a message arrived. A soft chime echoed through the room. A holographic glyph appeared in the air. An invitation. The Queen wished to speak with him. Jason dressed quickly, choosing a neutral tunic and leaving the ceremonial robes behind. He followed the glowing path projected on the floor, winding through corridors that seemed to rearrange themselves as he walked. He arrived at a garden. It was quiet, suspended in a gravity-neutral dome. Trees with silver leaves swayed gently, and pools of light rippled across the ground. The Queen stood at the center, her hair glowing faintly in the moonlight. She turned as he approached. "No guards?" he asked. She smiled. "They know better than to interrupt this conversation." Jason stepped closer. "I didn't expect to be summoned." "I didn't expect to be proposed to," she replied. They stood in silence. Then she gestured to a bench beneath a flowering tree. "Sit with me." He did. "I want you to know," she said, "that you are not a prisoner. You are not a pawn. You are a possibility." Jason looked at her. "You don't have to go through with this either." She nodded. "True, but I accepted your gesture." Not because of politics, because I saw something in you. What? Uncertainty, she said. And courage. Jason exhaled. I didn't mean to propose. I know, she said, but you did. And now the question is not what you meant, but what you mean to do. Chapter 6. The Queen's Offer. The garden was quiet, suspended in a gravity-neutral dome where time felt slower, softer. Silver-leaved trees rustled without wind, and bioluminescent petals drifted through the air like falling stars. Jason sat beside Queen Elira beneath a flowering arch that pulsed with ambient light. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was ceremonial, like the pause before a verdict. I didn't expect this, Jason said finally. She turned to him, her violet eyes reflecting the twin moons above. Nor did I. But here we are. Jason studied her face. There was no anger, no calculation, just calm. You could have refused, he said. I could have, she agreed. But I didn't. Why? She looked away toward the horizon where the city shimmered like a dream. Because of what I saw in your eyes, something rare. You didn't approach me out of strategy or ambition. You saw me standing alone, and you offered your hand. Jason exhaled. And now I'm engaged to an alien queen. Elira smiled faintly. You are, but not irrevocably. He turned to her. What do you mean? I mean, she said, that if you find me objectionable, if this union feels like a prison, I will release you. I will instruct my staff to cancel the ceremony, quietly, discreetly. The treaty will hold. I will make sure of it. Jason stared at her. You do that. I would, she said, because peace built on coercion is just another kind of war. He looked down at his hands. You're not what I expected. And you are not what my advisors expected, she said. They warned me about humans, about soldiers, about men who see queens as trophies. Jason shook his head. I didn't mean to propose. I just wanted to offer a moment of dignity. You looked alone. She nodded. And you gave me that moment, but now you must decide what it meant. Jason hesitated. You're beautiful, by any world's standards. But I wish I'd had the chance to propose for real, not just stumble into it. Elira's expression softened. Then take your time, think, reflect. I will wait. Jason looked at her. You're giving me a choice. I am, she said, because love without choice is just ceremony. They sat in silence again, the garden glowing around them. Jason felt something shift inside him. Not obligation, not fear, but possibility. And for the first time since the dance, he wondered what it would mean to choose her, not for peace, not for duty, but for himself. Chapter 7. Reflection. Jason Card sat alone in his quarters, the alien city glowing beyond the balcony like a constellation suspended in amber. The silence was thick, not empty but full of questions, of consequences, of the quiet gravity that follows a decision not yet made. He hadn't slept. The Queen's words echoed in his mind. Love without choice is just ceremony. She had offered him freedom, not as a test, not as a trap, but as a truth. And that truth unsettled him more than any threat ever had. He paced the room. The walls responded to his movement, shifting hue from soft blue to contemplative violet. Even the architecture seemed to sense his turmoil. He'd been trained to make decisions under fire, to act without hesitation. But this wasn't war. This was something older, something sacred. He thought of Earth, of the soldiers who had died believing peace was impossible, of the diplomats who had gambled everything on this fragile accord, of the millions who now depended on a dance he hadn't understood. And he thought of her, Queen Elira, regal, enigmatic, and impossibly kind. She hadn't demanded loyalty. She hadn't claimed him. She had simply waited. Jason sat at the edge of the bed, elbows on knees, staring at the floor. He remembered the moment he'd offered his hand, the way her eyes had met his, the way the music had shifted, as if the universe itself had leaned in to listen. He hadn't meant to propose, but maybe somewhere deep inside he had meant something. Not marriage, not politics, connection. He stood, walked to the mirror, looked at himself. Not the soldier, not the envoy, but the man beneath the uniform. The man who had seen a queen standing alone and had offered her dignity. He whispered to his reflection, "You're being an idiot." Then he turned and ran, through the corridors, past the guards, toward the throne room, toward her, toward the choice. Chapter 8. The Proposal. The throne room was quiet. Not empty, never empty, but quiet in the way sacred spaces are. Light filtered through crystalline arches, casting fractured rainbows across the obsidian floor. The air was cool, still, expectant. Queen Elira sat on her throne, poised and radiant, her white hair cascading like starlight. Her robot guards stood motionless, their mirrored armor reflecting the chamber's solemnity. Jason entered alone. He didn't wear his uniform. He didn't wear the ceremonial robes. He wore a simple tunic, dark and unadorned, the kind of garment that made no statement except sincerity. He walked slowly, each step echoing like a heartbeat. Elira watched him, her expression unreadable. Jason stopped at the base of the dais. He dropped to one knee. The silence deepened. "I came to ask you properly," he said, voice steady. "Not as a soldier, not as a symbol, as a man." She tilted her head slightly, violet eyes searching his. "Is this truly what you want?" she asked. Jason looked up at her. "More than anything I've ever wanted." A long pause. Then she rose from her throne. She descended the steps with quiet grace, her robes trailing behind her like mist. She stopped in front of him, her gaze unwavering. "Yes, Jason Card," she said. "I will marry you." Jason exhaled, a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. But she wasn't finished. "Just one thing more," he said, standing. Her smile was curious. "And what is that?" "I want a complete tutorial on your people's beliefs and customs. I don't want to ask for toast one morning and find out we're divorced." She laughed, a sound like wind through crystal. "Well," she said, stepping closer, "one thing I can tell you right now." She reached for his hand. "I'm the last woman you will ever dance with." Jason smiled, and for the first time since the war ended, he felt like peace wasn't just a treaty. It was a choice. Epilogue. The last woman he ever danced with. The twin moons hung low over the Tyrolean capital, casting silver shadows across the palace gardens. The war was a memory now, etched into monuments, whispered in lullabies, studied in schools. But it no longer defined the stars. Jason Card stood at the edge of the balcony, robes fluttering in the soft wind. Below, the city pulsed with life, human and Tyrolean, side by side, rebuilding not just infrastructure, but trust. Behind him, Queen Elira approached. She no longer wore the ceremonial crown. Her hair was loose, her expression softer. She was still regal, still luminous, but now she was something more, a partner, a wife, a woman who had chosen peace not through politics, but through vulnerability. Jason turned to her. "Do you ever think about that night?" he asked. She smiled. "Every day." I didn't know what I was asking. "You asked with your heart," she said. "That's all that mattered." They stood in silence, watching the stars. "I've been studying your customs," he said. "Still haven't figured out what the upside-down bowl thing means." She laughed. "It means you're trying." "That's enough." Jason reached for her hand. They didn't dance, not tonight, But the gesture was there, the memory, the promise. "You were right," he said. "You are the last woman I'll ever dance with." "And you," she replied, "are the first man I ever chose." Above them the stars shimmered, and below 2 worlds moved forward, bound not by treaties but by a single shared step. The end. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you.